It's amazing how quickly this year has flown by, and we're already almost at the 31st of October, heralding the most thrilling event of the year. I am, of course, talking about COP in Glasgow in the United Kingdom, which starts on the 31st of October and ends on the 12th of November. This is the normally annual United Nations climate change talks. But let's be honest, these talks normally fly under the radar, and I'll forgive you if you haven't already marked it out in your calendar. I mean, all the climate nerds,
Like you.
yes, like me, obsess over these negotiations, but they don't normally get that much wider coverage. But that's different for this one, COP26. It's being seriously hyped up. So what are these talks all about? What makes this one special? And why is there a good chance it won't live up to the hype? First off, a little bit of context, and let's start by breaking down the name. COP26 is the 26th COP, and
What does COP stand for?
I hear you cry, and I'm sure you can guess the first letter at least.
Climate?
No, absolutely not. That is ridiculous. COP stands for the Conference of the Parties, which is about as descriptive as calling it the meeting of the people. And let's be honest, MOP is at least as good an acronym as COP ever was. Since this is the 26th COP, a little mathematics reveals that there have been 25 COPs before it. That includes famous failures like Copenhagen in 2009 and welcome wins like the Paris talks in 2015, which led to the climate agreement known as the Paris Climate Agreement. You see, it doesn't actually have to be hard to come up with sensible names. Every country in the world has now signed up to the Paris Climate Agreement, but in spite of this, and I hate to be the one who has to break it to you, we still haven't solved climate change.
Really?
And so the meetings of the people continue, and many are saying this could be the most important MOP since Paris. So what makes this year's talks in Glasgow so special? Well, there are 4 C's to watch out for, and no, none of them stand for climate. They are contributions, cash, coal, and cars. Let's run through them. Firstly, and in lots of ways most importantly, are contributions. You see, the way the Paris Climate Agreement works is countries set out what they think they can do to fight climate change. These pledges are called nationally determined contributions.
But if they can just say whatever they want, doesn't that risk them falling way short?
Yes, it does. Initial pledges take the Earth on a path to 3 degrees Celsius of global warming. This might not sound that much more than the 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius limits of the Paris Climate Agreement, but it would mean a world of difference for everything from extreme weather events like heat waves, which would seriously ramp up, to massive rises in our seas, plus huge disruption to both the human and natural worlds. But now it's time for countries to update their pledges, hopefully ramping up ambition and getting serious emissions cuts underway as quickly as possible. The initial deadline for updating these contributions was actually in 2020, but many countries are still dragging their feet, including some of the big emitters. COP26 in Glasgow hopes to get things moving. Then we come to cash. You see, richer countries have promised poorer nations $100 billion per year, both to adapt to climate change and to cut their own emissions. So far though, contributions have been billions of dollars short. This seriously hampers the ability of poorer countries to cut their own emissions. But on top of that, if rich nations can't stump up the cash, that's going to make this year's meeting of the people pretty awkward.
Why were you ignoring me in there, Susan?
Because you still owe me billions of dollars, Roger. Okay, next up is coal. And now I really tried to think of a fun way of saying this, but I couldn't, and so I'm just going to come out and say it. Coal is terrible.
You're right. That wasn't fun.
Coal typically emits more greenhouse gases and so heats the planet more than any other fuel type.
Okay, but what if I don't care about greenhouse gases?
Well then, firstly, that is absurd. You really should. And then secondly, even if you don't care about these effects, coal is still really bad. It pollutes land, water, and air, and overall causes more deaths than any other energy source. For all of these reasons, the president of this year's climate negotiations is aiming to consign coal to history. And speaking of ridding ourselves of big pollutants, the UK is also hoping to convince other countries to stop selling fossil fuel-powered cars by 2040. So those are the 4 C's of COP, which sound like pretty awesome achievements, right? So we've got beefing up our climate change commitments, stumping up climate change cash, and ridding ourselves of coal and petrol cars. And there are lots of other things that negotiators are hoping to get done at this year's talks as well. We've got working out the rules, dealing with forests, and judging progress, among many other things. Links in the description so you can read more about all of these topics. But now for some disclaimers, and this first one is an important one. The climate negotiations tend not to see big, sweeping changes. Progress is more typically incremental, and this can be seriously frustrating given that we're currently speeding in the wrong direction and desperately need to slam on the brakes. What's more, the talks often don't achieve everything they set out to, and what they do achieve tends to be done at the very last minute. Actually, that's not quite true. It tends to be achieved after the last minute, since the talks almost always overrun. On top of that, campaigners have a bunch of concerns about this year's COP in particular. Didn't you discuss that in a previous video? I did indeed, and you can watch it up here, but executive summary, coronavirus. Now, even small progress on climate change will save lives. Every fraction of a degree of warming, every chunk of fossil fuels matters. And so even marginal successes would be meaningful. But at the same time, will this year's COP single-handedly save the world? Well, I wouldn't bet on it. Given all of these COP disclaimers, often the biggest news from these talks doesn't come from the negotiators, but comes from climate change activists, and I'm sure this year's talks will be absolutely no exception. It sounds like a lot is going to be happening, so will you be there? No, sadly, I will not be going to this year's COP. Well, I say sadly, but actually I'm pretty relieved about it. I've only been to 1 year's climate change negotiations, which was COP24 in Katowice in Poland, which I found, well, you can watch this video up here if you want to know how I found it. Although I won't be there, I am planning at least one other video to help explain everything that's going on. You're going to want to make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss that, and I just want to finish with a special thank you to all my patrons over on Patreon for supporting this channel. If you'd like to join them, the link is down here. Okay, until next time, bye.